You know that feeling when you walk through a museum and you look at all the artifacts of ancient Greece and Rome?
Oh, yeah. All the perfect marble.
Right. There is this overwhelming expectation of just like pristine order. You see these glowing white columns, the perfectly proportioned statues.
The pottery.
Exactly. The intricate pottery. It all feels so rational, so civilized. You leave with this sense that these were societies built on pure philosophical debate.
Like they were just sitting around inventing democracy all day.
Exactly.
It feels like looking at the flawless bedrock of Western civilization, just neatly packaged in white stone.
Yeah.
But the popular narrative we inherit, the one of high-minded citizens gathering in the forum to invent liberty, it's missing something huge.
Because when you step out of the museum and into the actual historical and economic reality of classical antiquity, suddenly that pristine marble starts to look like a very, very thin veneer.
Right. It's hiding a massive grinding machine.
Which is exactly why today we are taking a deep dive into Michael J. Hudson's research in his book, The Collapse of Antiquity. We're going to look at the hidden engine that actually drove Greek and Roman history.
And it is not what most people think.
Not at all. Because according to Hudson's work, for you listening, the primary driver of these societies wasn't these lofty debates about the nature of the soul.
No.
It was a centuries-long, incredibly bloody cage match between debtors and creditors.
It represents a massive historical blind spot, really. I mean, Hudson argues that while we usually think of classical antiquity as the birthplace of liberty, their societies were fundamentally shaped by a massive, unresolved debt crisis.
A crisis that lasted centuries.
Right. A structural crisis that ultimately led to the collapse of their economies and paved the way for oligarchy.
It's wild to think about.
It is. The very foundations of what we call Western civilization are, in many ways, the result of a catastrophic failure to manage personal debt.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the irony here is just palpable. We idolize these cultures for giving us our concepts of freedom, right? Mm-hmm. Yet their defining economic feature was forcing their own citizens into bondage.
Yeah. Literally enslaving them.
So to understand how a debt crisis of this magnitude could destroy ancient economies, we first have to look at how debt actually arrived in the Mediterranean. Because, and this blew my mind, I always assumed charging interest was just a natural, universal human invention.
Right, like domesticating wheat.
Or inventing the wheel. You just assume every culture figured it out.
Yeah.
But apparently it had to be imported.
Yeah, we tend to project modern financial systems backward into the past. But if you look at the Bronze Age agents, so think Mycenaean Greece, the era of the Trojan War.
Okay.
There is absolutely no record of interest-bearing debt.
None at all.
None. No compounding interest, no debt bondage. It just wasn't a local tradition.
So where did it come from?
Well, it wasn't until around the 8th century BC that Syrian and Phoenician traders began establishing commercial outposts across Greece and Italy. Okay. And they used temples as these neutral trading grounds. And alongside their trade goods, they brought their financial technology.
Meaning the practice of charging interest on loans.
Exactly.
Wait, so they are bringing this foreign financial system into a completely different culture.
Yeah.
Where did that system originate, originally? And how did it work in its home setting?
So the practice originated in the Bronze Age Near East, places like Babylon. But in those societies, the financial system operated with a massive built-in safety valve.
What kind of safety valve?
Kings in the Near East regularly issued what we call clean slate proclamations, basically a jubilee.
Wait, just forgiving everyone's debt?
Yes, exactly. When a new ruler took the throne, or if the region suffered, say, a devastating flood or a severe drought, the palace would literally cancel agrarian and personal debts. They would return forfeited land to its original owners and actually free any citizens who had fallen into debt servitude.
See, that sounds like a terrible way to run an empire.
How so?
Well, if a new king takes over and just voluntarily cancels the debt his own palace or his wealthy elites are owed, doesn't that just destroy the economy? I mean, who would ever lend money?
Well, you have to remember, the kings weren't doing this out of a sense of pure altruism or, charity.
Right.
It was a matter of state security. It was basic pragmatism.
Yeah.
In the Babylonian system, the king needed a free, self-sustaining population.
Because they needed them to work the land.
That and taxes. If private creditors were allowed to seize all the arable land and enslave the citizen farmers, well, those farmers could no longer pay taxes to the palace.
Oh.
And more importantly, they could not serve in the king's infantry.
So it's about the military.
Exactly. If you let the creditors win, you lose your army. And if you lose your army, a neighboring kingdom will simply invade and conquer you.
That makes total sense.
So the clean slate was a mechanism to constantly restore economic balance.
Keep the military strong.
Right. But when the Greek and Italian chieftains adopted the Near Eastern practice of charging interest, they completely ignored the clean slate tradition.
Oh, man. It's like importing a highly aggressive, invasive plant species, but just forgetting to bring over its natural predator.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You introduce interest-bearing debt into a society that has no central palace authority to periodically wipe the board clean. And without that safety valve, the compounding math of interest just takes over.
And the math becomes incredibly predatory very quickly. I mean, picture a small Greek farmer in the 8th century BC.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
A single bad harvest or a drought hits.
Right.
To buy seed for the next year or just to, feed his family, he has to borrow from a wealthy neighbor.
There's no social safety net.
Right. And because there is no central authority stepping in to forgive that debt, the interest compounds.
Oh, boy.
So the next year, even with a good harvest, a huge portion of his crop goes to paying just the interest.
Right. He can never catch up.
Exactly. Eventually, the math dictates that he will default. And when he defaults, the creditor seizes his land.
And then what?
Well, when the land is gone, the only collateral the farmer has left is his own physical labor and the labor of his family. He falls into permanent debt bondage.
Which means slavery.
Yes.
And if we look at our own modern economic reality, this exact historical moment is critical.
Oh, absolutely.
This specific failure to adopt debt forgiveness, it created the permanent polarization of wealth that defines Western economics today. It established this legal and cultural precedent where creditors can permanently seize property and strip debtors of their freedom with no reset button.
And because there was no reset button, these ancient societies quickly transformed into absolute powder kegs.
I can imagine.
The immense wealth polarization, where a tiny fraction of aristocrats owned all the land and the vast majority of citizens were facing starvation and slavery, it led directly to bloody revolutions across Greece. The agrarian underclass was backed into a corner.
And when people are facing permanent bondage, they will rally behind absolutely anyone willing to burn the system down.
Exactly. And that desperation paved the way for a historical figure we fundamentally misunderstand today.
The tyrant.
Yes, the tyrant.
Because when we hear the word tyrant today, we immediately picture a ruthless dictator, right? Someone oppressing the masses.
Right, a despot.
But Hudson points out that history is written by the victors. And in Antiquity, the victors were ultimately the landed oligarchs. So they controlled the definition of the word.
Exactly. But originally, many of these so-called tyrants in the 7th and 6th centuries BC, they were actually populist reformers.
Wait, really?
Populists? Yeah. They were often rogue members of the aristocracy or sometimes military leaders who looked around at the structural failure of their cities. They saw the masses falling into slavery and realized the current oligarchic system was completely unsustainable.
So they led popular uprisings.
Right. A classic example is Cypselus of Corinth.
Okay.
The city of Corinth was controlled by this elite clan called the Bacchiadae, who had monopolized all the wealth.
Typical.
Cypselus overthrows them, and his first order of business is entirely economic.
Let me guess. He cancels the debts.
He cancels the agrarian debts, he redistributes the captured land back to the citizenry, and he uses the hoarded wealth of the oligarchs to fund massive public works and infrastructure.
Which provides jobs for the poor.
Exactly.
See, it's fascinating because the culture of the time actually viewed this extreme wealth inequality as a societal sickness. Like early Greek poets and philosophers, guys like Theognis and Solon, they did not look at massive wealth accumulation and call it a success story.
No, not at all.
They viewed it as a literal disease threatening the body politic. They used the term pleonexia, which roughly translates to wealth addiction, or like an insatiable money lust.
Yeah, pleonexia.
And they warned that pleonexia inevitably mutates into hubris, which wasn't just excessive pride, but like an aggressive, socially destructive arrogance, where the rich felt entitled to trample on the rights of the poor.
Right. The philosophers understood that a society cannot function if one class views another purely as a resource to be extracted.
Yeah.
But the wealthy elites, they were playing a completely different game, and they were playing for keeps.
Which leads me to a big question. Here's where it gets really interesting. If these tyrants were actually populist heroes, canceling debts and building up their cities for the people, Why did reformers like Pisistratus in Athens famously need to surround themselves with armed bodyguards? Why was the threat of violence so constant if they were the good guys?
Because the oligarchs were not going to peacefully surrender the land and power they had spent generations monopolizing.
Right, they aren't just going to hand it over.
Exactly. The political landscape was brutally violent. The wealthy families utilized armed gangs and targeted political assassination to protect their property and basically halt these reforms.
Wow.
If a populist leader threatened to cancel debts, the creditor's first response was simply to have them murdered.
Just kill them.
Yeah. So the bodyguards weren't a symbol of dictatorial oppression. They were a basic necessity for survival against the established elite. The creditors would rather destroy the city than forgive a single debt.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So you have this continent-wide conflict. Cities like Corinth are experiencing total revolution and complete land redistribution. Meanwhile, Athens looks at this chaos and tries a completely different approach.
Right. They try to find a middle ground.
Yeah, they attempt to thread the needle. They want a moderate compromise to defuse the bomb without an all-out civil war.
And this brings us to the year 594 BC.
Yeah.
The Athenian elite are terrified. They see the aristocracies in neighboring cities being slaughtered or exiled by these populist tyrants.
Right, they see the writing on the wall.
Exactly. They realize the immense population of debt-bonded Athenians is on the verge of rising up. So to save themselves, they appoint a highly respected figure, Solon, as an archon.
An archon.
Essentially a supreme magistrate with emergency powers to rewrite the constitution.
And Solon institutes what becomes known as the Sysoxia, which translates beautifully to the shedding of burdens.
Yes.
The historical imagery here is striking. Solon physically goes out into the Athenian countryside and orders the uprooting of the horoi.
The boundary stones.
Right. But these weren't just simple property markers. A horos was a heavy stone pillar planted directly into a farmer's field, inscribed with the details of their debt.
Yeah.
It was a literal physical mortgage planted in the earth, signifying that the land and the physical labor of the farmer living on it legally belonged to a creditor.
It's so visceral.
It really is. By pulling those stones out of the ground, Solon was legally and symbolically freeing the land.
And that physical act of uprooting the stones was accompanied by a massive legal shift. Solon outright banned debt slavery for Athenian citizens.
Okay, that's huge.
It was. Up until that point, creditors could legally seize defaulting Athenians, chain them up, and sell them across the sea to foreign slave dealers.
Just absolutely brutal.
Right. Solon ended that practice. He established the legal principle that an Athenian citizen's body could not be used as collateral for a loan.
See, that sounds like a massive victory for the underclass. He pulled up the mortgages and stopped the slave ships. And there's always with these things, there's a massive catch.
There is?
He stops there.
Yeah.
He explicitly refuses to redistribute the land itself.
Yeah, he prevents the absolute worst-case scenario being sold as chattel to a foreign power, but he leaves the enormous consolidated estates of the wealthy entirely intact.
Which is the root of the problem.
Right. Solon's goal was compromise. He appeased the elites by not confiscating their private property, but in doing so, he left the core economic crisis completely unresolved.
So what does this all mean for the average Athenian farmer? What did this compromise actually look like on a daily basis?
It wasn't great.
Because you aren't technically a slave anymore, but you have no land of your own. Didn't Solon essentially codify an ancient version of a permanently trapped underclass?
Yes, exactly. They became known as the hectomoroi, the sixth parters.
Sixth parters.
Right. And exactly how the hectomoroi system worked is still debated by historians, but the crushing reality remains the same. Whether they had to pay 1/6 of their crop to the wealthy landowner, or whether they were only allowed to keep 1/6 to feed their own families.
Either way, it's terrible.
Either way, they were sharecroppers on land they would never own. They were locked into an endless cycle of subsistence farming, turning over a huge portion of their labor to the elite, just for the right to survive.
And because Solon didn't redistribute the land, 80 to 90% of the Athenian population still didn't have enough property to independently support themselves.
Which is staggering.
So the structural inequality was merely rebranded.
Mm-hmm.
Athens avoided immediate civil war, but they maintained a permanent powder keg in their society.
And while Athens engaged in this delicate, ultimately flawed balancing act, Sparta observed the same continent-wide debt crisis and took a radically different approach.
Completely wild approach.
Structurally extreme. They didn't try to manage the wealth addiction. They attempted to obliterate the concept of private wealth entirely from their citizen class.
Right. We're talking about the famous Lycurgan reforms. Sparta's solution to the threat of oligarchic debt crises was to militarize their entire society.
Yes.
But they could only do this through an act of massive, brutal subjugation. They invaded their neighboring region, Messenia, and forced the entire population into a state of serfdom.
Right, the Helots.
Exactly. These subjugated people, the Helots, were forced to do all the farming, all the harvesting, and all the manual labor.
The creation of the Helot class was the economic engine that allowed Spartan society to exist.
Wow.
By outsourcing all agricultural labor to a conquered people, the Spartan citizens themselves, who became known as the homioi, or equals, were completely freed from the necessity of earning a living.
So they didn't work at all.
No, they were transformed into a permanent, state-sponsored warrior class whose sole occupation was military training.
Mainly just to keep the Helots in line, right?
Exactly. Primarily to ensure the vastly more numerous Helots never successfully rebelled.
And to prevent the pleonexia, that wealth addiction tearing other Greek cities apart, Sparta went to astonishing lengths to engineer a culture of extreme public austerity.
No, extreme is the word.
Everyone, rich or poor, was forced to eat the exact same basic, highly unappetizing meals in public mess halls called syssitia.
Black broth.
Yeah, black broth. But the most fascinating mechanism they employed was their currency reform. They completely banned the use of silver and gold money.
Right. They understood that precious metals facilitate the hoarding of wealth. So instead of silver coins, the state issued pellinors.
Pellinors.
These were massive, heavy chunks of iron. But they added a crucial step. Before issuing the iron, they heated it until it was red hot and then quenched it in vinegar.
Wait, why vinegar?
This chemical process made the iron incredibly brittle, meaning it couldn't even be melted down and forged into useful tools or weapons.
So it was completely useless.
Intrinsically worthless.
The logistics of this are brilliant in a very dark way. The goal wasn't just to replace gold. The goal was to introduce massive physical friction into the act of commerce.
Exactly.
Xenophon, the Greek historian, actually joked that if a Spartan wanted to store the equivalent of what we might consider a few $100s, they would need a dedicated storage room in their house and a wagon pulled by a team of oxen just to transport it to the market.
It was a state-engineered attempt to make wealth physically burdensome.
Yeah.
The psychological intent was to force citizens to stop caring about money because executing even a simple financial transaction was an exhausting chore. If you can't easily hide it, hoard it, or carry it, you lose the incentive to accumulate it.
It's a fascinating psychological trick. It's like a state-mandated frozen bank account. But it requires total isolation to maintain.
Right.
The frozen bank account model only works if everyone in your society is equally restricted. And the historical reality is that the Spartan equality was a carefully maintained illusion.
Totally. Because behind the facade of the public mess halls and the brittle iron money, the Spartan elite secretly maintained massive private land holdings in Laconia itself.
Of course they did.
The land equality only applied to the conquered Messenian territories. The elite were quietly hoarding resources the entire time, and the inherent fragility of this system was completely exposed the moment Sparta interacted with the wider Mediterranean economy.
Right. Fast forward to the end of the Peloponnesian War in 404 BC. Sparta finally defeats Athens. Their generals and colonial governors are suddenly out in the wider world, and they begin demanding foreign tribute.
Yeah.
They're exposed to the vast wealth of the Persian and Athenian empires. They taste actual liquid wealth in the form of silver.
And the brittle iron money system instantly evaporates.
Ooh.
The Spartan generals bring massive amounts of foreign silver back home, and the hypocritical elite immediately use this influx of precious metal to buy up the land of the poorer Spartan citizens.
Wow. So it all falls apart.
Completely.
Right.
Within a few generations, Sparta experiences a massive debt and land crisis right at home. The number of full Spartan citizens plummeted because so many lost their land and couldn't pay their mess hall dues.
So they spent centuries engineering a society to avoid wealth concentration, and it collapsed the moment they won a war.
Pretty much, yeah.
So Sparta's extreme system failed under the weight of its own hypocrisy. But Athens somehow managed a different path. They held off the oligarchs, and actually funded a functional, culturally explosive society through a completely unique system.
Right.
By taxing their rich and literally digging up money.
And this is a pivotal mechanism in Western history. In 483 BC, Athens struck the ancient equivalent of a major oil reserve.
Okay.
They discovered a massive, deep underground vein of silver at Laurion. It provided a staggering, sudden influx of state-owned wealth.
Naturally, the immediate populist impulse was just to divide the silver up and hand it out to the citizens, right? Like a stimulus check.
Exactly. But a brilliant statesman named Themistocles convinced the Athenian assembly to do something far more strategic.
What did he propose?
He argued that Athens should use this newly discovered wealth to construct a fleet of 200 state-of-the-art trireme warships.
The Navy.
Yes, and that exact navy went on to secure Greek independence by defeating the Persian Empire at the Battle of Salamis.
But building 200 warships is one thing. Maintaining them has to be astronomically expensive. I mean, wood rots, sails tear, and thousands of rowers require constant wages.
Exactly.
Athens couldn't just rely on the silver mines to fund the daily operations of an empire.
No, they couldn't. So they introduced a truly innovative financial and social mechanism to keep their democracy afloat.
Okay.
They forced their super rich to foot the bill through a system called the liturgoi, or liturgies.
Now, this wasn't a standard flat-rate income tax, was it?
Not at all.
It was highly targeted and performative. The wealthiest Athenian families were legally obligated to outfit and maintain those warships for a year.
Right.
They were required to pay the massive costs of the public theater festivals, outfitting the choruses. They had to supply the public gymnasia.
And the brilliance of the liturgoi was how it weaponized aristocratic pride. It was engineered as a system of competitive philanthropy.
Competitive philanthropy.
Yeah. The wealthy families would actually compete with one another to throw the most lavish festival or build the fastest, most beautifully decorated warship. They were seeking public honor and political prestige.
Okay, but the underlying mechanics of this system were profound. It effectively taxed the surplus wealth of the oligarchs.
Exactly.
It drained the excess capital they would otherwise use to buy up land or fund private mercenary armies, while simultaneously providing massive state employment for poorer citizens who worked in the shipyards and theaters.
Right.
But wait, if these oligarchs were so obsessed with keeping their money, why on earth would they voluntarily compete to buy the most expensive warships for the city? Why not just hoard the silver and refuse to pay? Was this golden age of democracy just an oligarchy with really, really good PR?
Well, because the social pressure was absolute and the threat of exile was real.
Ah, exile.
Yeah. But we shouldn't mistake their participation for enthusiastic support. The wealthy Athenian families profoundly resented this system.
I bet.
They absolutely hated the financial burden. They despised the democratic assembly of poor citizens who constantly voted to launch new military campaigns, knowing the rich would be the ones legally forced to pay for the ships.
Right. Let's go to war. You pay for it.
Exactly. And this wealthy resentment wasn't just a background complaint. It fundamentally shaped the geopolitics of the era.
Really? How so?
During the devastating Peloponnesian War against Sparta, the Athenian rich actively pushed for peace.
Okay.
Not out of some noble pacifist ideology, but simply to avoid paying the crushing war taxes required to keep the fleet afloat.
Wow.
Many of them were perfectly willing to let the democratic system be overthrown by Sparta if it meant their personal wealth and property rights would be protected.
That is incredible. And this reveals the core tension of classical antiquity for all of us listening. The history of Greece and Rome isn't just a story about the gradual evolution of philosophy or, the perfection of marble statuary or brilliant military tactics.
No.
Beneath all of that, it is fundamentally the story of how a society chooses to handle the compounding math of debt and who holds the power when the bill comes due.
Right, because throughout the ancient Mediterranean, the creditors eventually won.
They did.
They successfully consolidated the arable land. They violently crushed the populist reformers who tried to enact clean slates, and they effectively rewrote the historical record to ensure those reformers were remembered only as power-hungry tyrants.
It's pretty bleak.
It is. The legal and ethical principles established by those victorious Roman and Greek oligarchs eventually became the absolute bedrock of modern Western law.
They established the foundational principle that a creditor's right to their property, their absolute right to demand repayment, supersedes a debtor's right to personal liberty.
Yes. That was the ultimate victory of the ancient oligarchy. and it remains the structural foundation of our global economic system today.
Wow.
The Bronze Age Near East survived for thousands of years, specifically because their kings periodically intervened. They wiped the slate clean to restore economic balance and prevent the mass enslavement of their own people.
Right.
Classical antiquity ultimately collapsed into feudalism because it stubbornly refused to do so.
Which leaves us with a lingering question to mull over. When you look at our modern free market economy today, an economy that relies entirely on the absolute sanctity of debt repayment, an economy completely devoid of any ancient clean slates, to periodically reset the board, are we actually just running the exact same ancient experiment?
That's a great question.
Are we building a society on that same beautiful, pristine marble veneer, while a hidden engine of compounding debt pushes us toward the exact same oligarchic collapse? Something to ponder the next time you admire a Greek statue.